Welcome back. All right, so in honor of, yeah, I'm going back to welcome back. I was just messing with people the last couple of days. So, in honor of passing 300,000 subscribers, I've decided to do a couple of different things today. First off, I don't think I've talked about how I do my power rankings this year, and I think it's been a while since I've done a video where I discussed this. And so, since there's a lot of questions that come up on every power rankings video, also, a lot of comments. I don't go into the comment section on the power rankings like I used to. And so I'm going to go through this. I come up with 10 points because it's YouTube. If you have less than 10 and you try to upload a video, the uploader will be like, "You sure you don't want to put a 10th point in there? Because we really like top 10 lists on YouTube." So, starting off with number one, and this is the biggest bone of contention point that I needed to go through here. Wins and losses are only part of the story. The idea with the power rankings is they should be at least somewhat predictive. So, and I'm saying at least somewhat because obviously teams that are playing poorly are going to turn around. Teams that are playing well are going to fall apart. It does happen, but it should be basically here's how I think everybody's playing. So the wins and losses part doesn't necessarily play as large of a role as I think some people think it should. There's how a team wins, how a team loses. So if five teams win on any given night and five teams lose on any given night, it does not mean that all five teams that lost are worse than all five teams that won. And I don't care who beat who. So if New Jersey beats the Rangers, it doesn't necessarily mean the New Jersey Devils are above the Rangers in the power rankings. It just doesn't factor in for me. I try to, and I'll go as I go through the list. I really clarify this a little more. But yeah, the wins and losses are only part of the story. Yesterday's games had very little impact on the power rankings because they're really most of those results were ones that we go, yeah, that's how that should work. And if you beat a team that's towards the bottom of the power rankings, again, it's going to have less impact on where a team stands in the power rankings going forward. Shootouts. So I've talked about this too. Shootouts I treat like ties. So if a team wins in a shootout, they're probably not moving up or moving down. Same with a loss in a shootout. Yes, it does mean something more if you get a shootout loss against a team that's number one on the board rather than number 32 on the board. But I do treat shootouts like ties. It's not a hockey play. You don't have shootouts in the playoffs. Therefore, I don't think they're an indicator of a team that played better that night. It is a penalty shot contest. It is not a hockey play. Same as I treat regulation wins with more as being more impressive than overtime wins as well. That yes, this team won in 60 minutes. So, and again, it depends on who it's against. It also depends on how. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Number three, movement is always greatest at the start of the season. So as the season rolls along, there's often complaints that there isn't much movement on the power rankings board. Usually, once we get to about middle of December, there's not a lot of movement on the board. But very often it's that, teams I feel like are established and yeah, there isn't going to be a lot of movement. And it's not unique to my power rankings. I know it happens on power rankings for anybody else who does that with National Hockey League or any league really. And when I did NFL power rankings, and even though that was a 17-week, only 17-game season, once you reach about the halfway mark of the season, a little bit after, you have a good idea of who's going to be in or who's not going to be in the playoffs, and movement up or down of power rankings gets a little more difficult. But I don't do NFL power rankings anymore, so don't go over to the entertainment guy looking for them because you'll be disappointed. I rarely move a team more than two spots based on one game. So if a team is 28th and they win a huge game over a team that's number one on the board, I don't go, well, they're moving up 8 spots because that's so. Now it's an impressive win, but it's one game. So basically, I try not to move a team up more than 2 spots unless the teams that they're moving ahead of I feel like are playing really really poorly. And again, I will make that decision as to how much a team moves up. But the other thing to keep in mind is so a team might move up 2 spots, but then that team that's 3 spots ahead might have lost that night and might drop a spot, and so they gain 3 spots as a result. I do keep in mind, like, okay, if I bump them past this team, what does it say about this? And I go through that on the daily. So it's rare that a team moves more than 2 spots based on one game, especially once we get past the start of the year. Start of the year, it's completely different. But once we get up to, like, we're up to about the quarter mark now, right now. So, yeah. Those big, huge moves should become less and less likely. Uh, Teams can move based on other teams' play rather than their own, and I think this is one that might throw people too. So a team might be 16th on the board and have a mediocre week where they should stay 16th. However, two of the teams behind them had a much better week, so they moved down 2 spots. So maybe they were, say, 2-1 that week, and one of the wins was in a shootout. Maybe both wins are in shootouts, but the fans will go, "Hey, we won 2 out of 3 this week. Why do we drop a couple of spots?" That means they got passed. More than their play, it's indicative that the other teams I felt played better and bumped them down. There are times where I will look at the power rankings on a Saturday, look at the movement from the Saturday before, and I'll go back and I'll look back at the results and go, okay, this team moved down, but I thought they played well. All right, okay. And then I go through and either I make an adjustment based on that, or I leave it as is. Well aware that that fan base is going to be ticked off. There have been times before I even do a power rankings when I'm figuring them out that I'll say to Yvonne, I'll say, well, this is the fan base you're going to be watching for tonight. They're not going to be happy, but and I'll explain to her this is why this team dropped or this team went up. Because I know how people are going to feel, and I feel kind of bad as well when that happens because I'm like, yep, they're dropped a couple of spots this week. Hopefully they're back up next week, but it happens. There's 32 teams, and it's really fluid in terms of who the better and worse teams usually are. Daily updates. I was trying to get away from daily updates this season. I was going to try to just once a week go in and update them. I found that was kind of a nightmare, and it did not create a result where I was happier with the results. So the daily updates work a lot better for me, and it is something that, I don't know, keeps me kind of plugged in to what's going on in the league a little bit better, I think, than it does if I'm just updating the power rankings every week. Because I've had that argument of, well, why? So by the time Sunday night rolls around, the power rankings board does not look the same as it does on Saturday night. So I will basically say, and the one that makes me chuckle is when by Monday night, whatever somebody's been complaining about on the power rankings from that Saturday has already shifted. So how can this team be ahead of this team? Well, they're not anymore, but they were on Saturday, so happens. But I would never do daily power rankings. It's just that's the way to just club it. And I don't intend to club the video that is generally the most watched of the week. So yeah, the daily updates work, although that's been a bone of contention people have had with me for a long time. Strength of opponent really does matter when it comes to me deciding on who moves up and who moves down. So if a team goes through, let's say they play San Jose, they play Columbus, and they play Anaheim with how Anaheim's playing lately, and they win all 3 games. Um, cool. But if another team goes in and say they lose to Colorado in overtime, they then go in and beat Florida, and they take the Jets to overtime or a shootout. I'm more impressed by the team that had those strong opponents and got points there than by the team that won the games that they should just win anyways. And I do take that into consideration again, especially on really busy nights where there's 14 or 15 games, which absolutely can be a nightmare for the board. And for me, of course, running the board. But strength of opponent is something that I keep in mind with, like, okay, that team went in and beat the Rangers tonight. That's really impressive. So I'm going to allow them to jump over the team that, barely beat St. Louis tonight because I feel like that win over the Rangers is a more impressive feat. But again, that means that a team that won that night dropped down a spot, and then again, that's where and I understand. I understand people being upset, but this is kind of how I've done this for a long time. It doesn't matter if a team beats a team I've cheered for. So I see that every now and then, like, THG this week. You see that power rankings? What an idiot. So basically, my team is awesome and defeated Boston, Dallas, and Vancouver this week. So that's why he was mean to my team on the power rankings. I've said this before, I'll say it again. If I held a grudge with every team that beats a team that I cheer for, I wouldn't do this. I would hate this. I wouldn't do it, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. There have been times where a team will beat Vancouver while Vancouver's towards the bottom of the league, and I go, they beat Vancouver, big deal. And there have been times where I've reacted that way. And thought to myself, okay, well, we'll see when it's Vegas. We'll see when it's, let's say, LA's on a really good run. We'll see what happens there. So I don't give any more or less weight to defeating a team that I cheer for because they're just their numbers on the board. Even this week, I didn't realize Dallas, Boston, and Vancouver were back together on the board, all three of them back to back to back, until, that day where I was getting ready to do the power rankings. I'm like, seriously, they're back together again? Damn it. But I mean that, but I didn't split them up based on that. I just kind of was like, well, if that's how that's gonna work, but I understand how it looks. But again, it's sort of like how the Alberta teams have been together, the Pennsylvania teams have been next to each other in the power rankings here and there. I think the Florida teams have been next to each other too. It's just weird how that works out. It's not something I do intentionally or with any conscious thought that I'm putting them together, and I don't expect those three teams to be high up and in the top row throughout the season. So, it's just there. And it's funny too because in previous seasons I've been told I'm too hard on teams that I cheer for, but it depends on which team it is. So at any rate, it's just that whole mess of if I could go back in time and start over again, would I've actually told the internet who I root for? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I wouldn't have said anything. Maybe I wouldn't have done that. But anyways, it's done. It's done. It's done. Results can mean that I view rankings as accurate. So Team A beats Team B. I look at the board and go, yep, they're right where they belong. Yep. And that happens more and more as the season rolls along. So I am far more likely to have the reaction of, yep, that's where they belong in, say, January or February than I am in October or November, where I might have some second guessing and, well, maybe they belong below that team. Maybe they belong above this team. Ideally, if the power rankings have any level of accuracy to how I go through and figure them out, I should not be moving teams around. If I'm moving teams around a lot, one of two things. It either means there's a really, really amazing hot streak or cold streak going on to cause that tremendous movement, or I really wildly over or underestimated a team. And either way, it's surprising, but it's upsetting if I feel like I've over or underestimated a team. And so, yeah, I don't like seeing those. I refer to them as market corrections because it's sort of like the stock market. That market correction comes in and all of a sudden your stock drops. It feels like that happens with teams on the power rankings at times too, but it should not be happening in January or February like it does earlier in the season, unless a team buys or sells at the trade deadline. And then, yeah, then those big moves can take place there too. And I do have a small board which has all 32 teams on it. And I mean like a small board, the tiny board as I've referred to it in videos when I've had to use it, and I use that every day. That's what's got all the rankings on it. It's a board that if somebody came in here and came through, they wouldn't think anything of. They think, oh, that's kind of weird, because I don't have numbers on the board. I just have all 32 teams. But if somebody actually looked at it and spent a moment, they'd be like, that's the power rankings. He has it on the floor on a small board that faces the wall. And it has to face the wall because I got rabbits down here that'll eat magnets. They'll eat and chew on magnets. So I have to make sure that it's in a spot where I know that it is, and that it's also not going to get chewed up by, because I don't want to be standing here someday and going, I had the power rankings already, but Cinnabon chewed up all the magnets, so I have no idea where anybody is. So if you guys could help me. So yeah, that I do look over it multiple times a day, and I do look over which teams are where, and I will sometimes sort of make that face of that team doesn't necessarily belong there, and then I go through the results and I'm like, well, I guess. And there are definitely times where I get set to do the power rankings and I'm still kind of scratching my head, and that's why when those power rankings go up, I will say during those power rankings or at the start, this week's power rankings I'm kind of on the fence with, kind of like there's some teams here that I feel like are in a state of flux, because there are teams that'll be like, I think this one's too high or this one's too low, but based on the results from this week, this is where they belong. But I know they're not staying there. So there's that. But anyways, I wanted to do this today, just kind of a fun video for all you fine people on the internet. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you have not done so already. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.